Welcome to the latest episode of Five on the Floor on the Five Reasons Sports Network. Thanks for joining us on your favorite podcast app, on Apple Podcasts, on Android, Spotify, or the Five Reasons YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe to Off the Floor. Link right here in the description. We made it easy for you. $2.99 per month. If you click all the way through, you'll bypass the Apple upcharge. You'll get access to all of our stage shows and 10 other channels. Talk Heat with the most knowledgeable Heat fans out there. This is where you get the most Miami Heat. Also, check out the great sponsors of the Five Reasons Sports Network. Includes our friends over at Underdog Fantasy. You know the code 5, F-I-V-E? Well, you can use it at Underdog to get up to $1,000 in bonus cash instantly. You think Terry Rozier is finally going to snap out of a struggle? You can play him over. You can play anything over under there. There's also plenty more on the app. Football, basketball, it's all on there. Join over 5 million fans already playing on Underdog. Again, use the code 5 to get that up to $1,000 in bonus cash instantly. Here's the thing. You must be at least 18 or 19 in Alabama or Nebraska, 19 in Colorado for some games, 21 in Massachusetts or Arizona, and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. If you're concerned with your play, call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.ncbgambling.org. And now, today's episode.
Down the bitch gang. Yikes. 5 on the floor. Ride for my dogs. Where here's the thing. You can check the score. Hustle hard, couple scars. Wearing rubber frauds. Just like Butler said, you in trouble, y'all. Kept the floor playing. Got it all banned. Y'all seen the block. Stop with one hand. And Pat we trust.
You sound scared.
It's power have the guts. We're here to bring the heat. Y'all can hang it up.
Welcome to Five on the Floor, a daily insider show on the Miami Heat and the NBA, featuring Ethan Skolnick, Greg Sylvander, Alex Toledo, Brady Hawk, and others from the Five Reasons Sports Network. Also, make sure to subscribe to Off the Floor for the most heat anywhere.
All right, welcome back to Five on the Floor. Here's today's floor plan. I'm Ethan Skolnick. You can follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick at 5 Reasons Sports. I get Alex Toledo. You can follow him at Tropical Blanket. We're coming to you after Jimmy Butler had his best game as a member of the Miami Heat in the regular season in all 6 of his seasons with the Miami Heat. That's according to Basketball Reference. This was his highest game score. It was the second highest game score of his entire regular season career. Because he had, well, you wouldn't know, of course, but there was one game when he was in Chicago that was better, according to Basketball Reference, and he's had 2 that were better in the postseason. So we're talking about Jimmy Butler now at a time where he's playing at a high level again. Didn't matter in Detroit because the Heat lost anyway, even with Jimmy scoring 40 and having 19 rebounds and having a triple-double. What Alex and I are going to get into today, though, are some of the topics that are out there still in the space. And I've said that what we're seeing on social media, it's not, and it was initiated by ESPN and is being perpetuated by ESPN, is not necessarily a non-story. It's just not a news story. I keep staying with that, okay? But we're going to try to address some of the things that have come out, because what happens is that, one, this topic is now, it's gotten a life of its own. And people are confirming or validating information that is not really relevant to the entire process, because all the conversation is about what Jimmy may or may not want and what his representatives may or may not have told other teams or told other people about teams he would play for. And it's about what other teams might want in terms of whether or not they would pursue Jimmy Butler. But nobody talks about what the Miami Heat might want. And that's how we've gotten to this place where Bradley Beal is the major topic of conversation now. So we're going to address this 2 ways, Alex. We're going to address this, one, with Bradley Beal, whether the Heat would have any interest in Bradley Beal, whether anybody would have any interest in Bradley Beal to make a deal actually happen here. The second part of this we're going to address is something that I believe, based on my own reporting, which is that the Miami Heat are open to another option here that is not just giving Jimmy Butler an extension, as we've discussed, at the current rates that we've discussed many times, which is ripping up his, if Jimmy was to essentially, he's got 1 year left on an option. He wanted to sort of get rid of that. You remove that year, and the Heat give him 2 years to replace the one. Okay, that was one thing that's been discussed. At least that's something that Butler's camp, that Jimmy wanted. It's not something that the Heat are willing to do at this time. It wasn't something they were willing to do this summer. Doesn't seem like they're willing to do it going forward either. But I have heard about something else they may be willing to do, and so we will talk about that as we go forward. But I want to start with the Bradley Beal part, because we talked about this on the pre-show. The only piece that the Phoenix Suns have to try to acquire Jimmy Butler, the only big piece, would be Bradley Beal, correct? They're not trading Booker or Durant, and those are the only other 2 contracts.
Exactly.
They're so
Okay.
pressed against the second apron and all that they're over the second apron, whereas the Heat are
Right.
under it, right? So they can't aggregate contracts, and they can't take back more money either. Similarly to the Heat, who now have a little bit more space under the second apron because of the Thomas Bryant trade at this moment. But with neither team really wanting to get more money back, and the Suns can't, and they can't aggregate a contract, it means it has to be one of Beal, Booker, Durant, and like you mentioned, it's not going to be likely not going to be one of Booker or KD.
Okay. And Bradley Beal at this stage, and I'll go through the contract numbers here just real quick. This year, he's making $50.2 million. Next year, scheduled to make 53.7. The year after, 26-27 season, he has a player option at $57.1 million. Now, that summer of 26, which would predate that 26-27 contract, is a summer that some teams are pointing to be able to get lean in terms of their cap space because there are supposed to be some star players who could be available at that time. These things change, but the summer of 26 is something that we've talked about. Essentially, if you acquire Bradley Beal, you're taking yourself out of that summer in a lot of ways, right? Because if you acquire him, unlike Jimmy's extension Jimmy's looking for, okay, which would essentially this is 24-25, so then 25-26 would be the next year, but then it would be the one additional year. So it actually would be the same. If you were to sign Brad, you would have $57 million on your books because the odds are that Bradley Beal is going to opt into that. Okay. Because Bradley Beal at this stage, we also talked about this pre-show, is not an elite player, right? Would you classify him at this stage as a good player, but not a great player?
Pretty much. It's pretty much where I'm at. Like, I'm sure he could get back closer to all-star production if given a bigger role, even as a secondary role. But I don't think, no shade, and I don't like to do all the contract stuff all the time. But personally, for the contract he's making, that's like top 10 player money. I don't think he's anywhere near that, even if you give him, if he were to go back to a slightly bigger role.
Okay. And we also discussed this pre-show. His current value on the open market, if he was a free agent, you and I both believe would be about Tyler Hero's contract money, right? But no higher. About roughly, Tyler's in around the $28 to $30 million range per year.
Pretty much. I don't know, like maybe tops out at 40 mil, but that again, like he would have to really like have like a nice season leading up to that point. Like that feels kind of generous considering like the history over the past couple of years.
Okay. I would say 40 would be really generous. I think that at this stage, based on what we've seen, which is that you can't really go anywhere, even with Beal in his prime as a number one option, because those teams would win 25 to 30 games. And Beal as a third option in Phoenix has been a bit clunky. He's not as healthy as he used to be. He's older, obviously, than he used to be. So he'll probably break down more as we go forward. I think even with the current NBA financial landscape where contracts will explode further with the TV contract and everything, to me, I think even saying he's a $30 million player at this stage per year is generous. I don't know that he would even get that on the open market. I mean, to me, like, what did Harden get? Like, that's on a 2-year deal. I mean, I know James is older, but I think he's probably, and I'm not the biggest Harden fan. He's still more effective. He's more effective than Beal at this stage, right? Is that
He
fair?
creates so much more offense,
Okay, so that's where we're at with that. So when we say all of that, I can say flat out, Alex, that the Heat are not interested in Beal at that number at this time, and we know that because they weren't even interested last summer. They weren't
Harden
interested
got 2
last
years,
summer.
70 million, by the way.
Okay, so and I don't think Beal's worth that. Okay, so 2 years, 70 million, so a short deal. That's about what we're talking about. Okay, we know that last summer the Heat had an opportunity to acquire Beal, and they didn't. They didn't acquire him because of the size. They could have gotten him for very little player compensation. But they didn't acquire him because of the size of the contract and because he has a no trade clause, which they asked him. They did explore it. Pat asked Mark Bartelstein, who he's worked with many times, Beal's agent. Bartelstein's son, by the way, works for Phoenix, okay, in their front office. He asked Mark if Beal would strip away his no trade clause, and he was told no, and that was the end of the conversation. Beal still has the no trade clause. He somehow was confused about why Miami didn't want him this offseason when that is the reason they didn't want him, the primary reason, and the size of the contract. The contract is still the same contract. He still has the no trade clause. He's a year older. He hasn't been particularly productive, okay, or at least not outsized productive to be a star. I know that the Heat are not interested in that deal at this time. If you were the Heat, would you even entertain the thought? Is there any pick that you could be given? Because everybody talks about this Phoenix 2031 unprotected when Pat will be what 85, 86 years old. Like would that entice you? Is there any number of picks that would get you to take Bradley Beal instead of Jimmy Butler?
That's the thing. It would have to be several picks, right? I
Mhm.
think just the one, and of course, it would have to be compared to whatever other offers are out there, right? But just in general, like if I'm the Heat, I'm immediately like, no, no,
Right.
no way. Like that's not what we're about to settle for. Like, but when you compare it to right, like you guys talked about on that one Jimmy pod, if they want to, at some point pivot to kind of a transitional year where they're not bottoming out because it's like what they do, then yeah, Beal is kind of that type of player. Like that even if he's not worth the contract, he is going to give you a certain level of production. It's not going to be a superstar level production, but it's like you put him there with Tyler and Bam, and there you go. You've got a pretty good looking ape seed right there. But no, like it's kind of like along the same lines as like when I mentioned maybe Jimmy for Ingram and like teams swapping their
Mhm.
problems like that. It's kind of along those same lines. But I wouldn't see that as something that the Heat would want to do. It seems like they do really value the draft picks now, and I know maybe some people scoff at that because of what it's looking now in hindsight with the Terry trade, since they gave one away there and now he's a negative, right? So if
Right.
you want to, I get that part of it, but I think it seems like they value them more than they used to, right? And they really need to rebuild that. They need to rebuild the draft capital. So I don't think that's the type of deal that they will go for, to be honest.
Yeah, we've talked about the draft capital and how they don't have any seconds. Well, they got 2 seconds. One is with the Lakers, right, for the next 7 drafts, and the first rounder they had to give up the one for Rozier, which we just discussed in the last pod. So there is a point to getting draft capital, particularly if you can flip it for other players. But the other possibility that's come up here is, and because Phoenix fans, when the Heat fans and Heat media keep saying they don't want Beal, they're not going to take Beal. Okay, their thing is, well, they'll send him to a third team. And I'll just ask you this question. Do you see any other team out there that would want this contract? Like they're mentioning Brooklyn. Like, why would Brooklyn clean out they're cleaning out their roster to bring
That's
in
what they're going to
Bradley
use all their
Beal?
cap space on, just to absorb Bradley Beal's like terrible deal. Just to be frank, like that's what they would have to be paid handsomely in picks. Like maybe if they can just absorb it and take that pick that you're talking about, and they don't really have to send back anything of value. I don't know how though. Like that's so much money that has to be matched. Like I don't know how they would go about doing that in a way that's like worth it for both
And Alex,
teams.
what would the Heat get in that? Let's throw Brooklyn into the mix here, right? Let's say that Brooklyn, okay, let's say that they value the 2031 Phoenix first rounder. Okay, because we know that Phoenix doesn't have many picks, the Heat don't have many picks, right? So without involving a fourth or fifth team, let's just say they value it. Okay. Then they would have to send money to the Heat to make this thing work, right? Like, so who are the Heat taking on? Cam Johnson, Dorian Finney-Smith? I mean, is this what I mean, they've already moved Schroeder, right? So he's not even an option at this stage. Like, I just
Well,
don't know how the mechanics of this work. Well, the Melton
Melton isn't
contract,
expiring, but I don't know how. Like I haven't even
it could be
thought
moved
about.
again.
I
It,
really have
it,
not thought about the mechanics of how Beal third team trade would work. It just seems so complicated, especially because the Suns cannot aggregate players. That means they cannot,
right.
unless I'm misunderstanding, since they're over the second apron, that means they can't use a second player in a deal.
No, they
So
can't.
how are you getting this done? Like
I don't know. And I'm also looking at all these other teams around the NBA, and I'm like, one team that was mentioned today is Orlando. Orlando has this very nice build, right? Beal was talked about as a possibility for them before. They're going to spend their resources at this stage on Bradley Beal. Like, this is not 2019 Bradley Beal. This is 2024. He's had difficulty staying healthy the past couple of years. He's not coming off a season where he's led the league in scoring or was up for the league lead in scoring. Wasn't he first or second one season? He had a bunch of 25, 5-5 years in a row. But I mean,
what
this
about
is people are saying that you can't get a first round pick for Tyler. I don't want to have the Tyler discussion again, but you can't get a first round pick for Tyler Hero, who's 24 years old, improving, and is on a contract averaging about $29 million. But yet Bradley Beal is somehow an asset to some other team, being paid north of 50 with a player option of 57 in a year where teams are going to want to get as lean as they can against the cap. I mean, to me, that doesn't make any sense. So when I look at the trade possibilities here, I just don't see a way that anything, even if the Heat were motivated to move Jimmy, which they're not, I just don't see Phoenix as a reasonable possibility here. And so we're going to end up pivoting back to these same teams like Golden State. Would they take the Wiggins contract? Would they want to extend Kuminga? Would they have any interest in Pods? But I just, this is why I wanted to do this, because we're just hearing two of the three sides of the story here. What Jimmy may or may not want, which I don't even know, I can't even confirm any of that stuff. Okay. Or what another team may want, which it seems like Phoenix is the one of these teams that it may be Golden State that would actually have some interest in him. I mean, the Nets, we don't really know. Houston seems to be holding on to its pieces. Dallas, there doesn't seem to be a lot of noise coming out of there. But nobody considers the Heat side of this, or the side of the other teams that might have to get involved in this to facilitate this deal. If this was a team like OKC, okay, that was loaded with picks and could just shower picks on the Heat and say a Brooklyn or something to take on this contract, that's one thing. But Phoenix has no way to get those picks unless they move Durant, unless they move Booker. There's no way to generate those picks.
No, you're 100% right about that. They're kind of like just about at the end of like what they can offer in a trade, like we mentioned, because they can't aggregate deals since they're over the second apron, because they don't have like very many middling contracts. Like everything would have to be done separately, right? Which makes it so complicated. And like Bradley Beal, you mentioned the contract. I don't know how that's somebody you can even throw in, to any trade. Not, so a 3-team trade just seems so complicated. It would have to be something like another team that's, like these names that we've heard over the past year of like guys who maybe on the outs with their team, like Ingram and Levine. It's like a huge contract like that, and teams just kind of swapping problems. The Bulls are like whatever. If Levine doesn't want to be here, we'll take Beal, right? I don't know if the Bulls are in that mindset or not, but it would have to be a team like that, right? Like maybe the Pelicans. That you've heard. There's been a lot of like reports lately about guys that they're willing to move, and like the only ones that were like quote unquote untouchable or whatever word they use that they're not willing to move them were like Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, their first round pick from this past year, Misi. I don't know. The Pelicans are just like it's impossible to tell what they're gonna do right now, because they were like, I know that they're better than their record, but they've just been they've been the most banged up team to me all year. When you just look at the sheer amount of like rotation players and big and like core players, and just how long it's like the entire season they've just been cycling. I don't think they've been healthy for a single game. So that's just a weird situation. Could kind of see it going either way. All of that to say, like, it would have to be that type of trade for Beal to get involved into a 3-team trade. That seems like overly complex. So I don't know. Like, I don't see the Suns thing really happening, but I don't know. Unless Jimmy pulls a Dame and says only Phoenix.
And then we're going to hear from all the Portland fans who, such as they exist at this point, we're going to say, hey, you got on us for not trading him where he wanted to go, but you won't send Jimmy where he wants to go. I don't see that happening. I feel like that is the groundswell that the people in Phoenix are trying to build here, is that, to make it like Jimmy just wants to play there, is going to declare just playing there. I haven't heard that noise. And maybe that comes in the next month or two. If he has a bunch of 40-point triple doubles and they keep losing, maybe the frustration boils over and you start to get that. But I'm not sensing that. All right. On the other side of this, okay, because I want to address the Beal thing. On the other side of this, we're going to quickly address another possibility that has not been talked about a lot, but I do think it is one that the Heat are open to, based on my conversations with Heat officials and others over the past few days. Before we do, I want to mention a great sponsor of the 5 Reasons Sports Network, our friend Eric Rubenstein. You can find him at ericrubenstein.com. We do not wish a car accident on anybody, but if you have one, this is the guy to reach out to. 877-829-ERIC or 877-829-3742, ericrubenstein.com. He will handle it from the very first step to the last, and he will help you get your money. Huge Miami Heat fan, grew up in South Florida, went to St. Thomas University, magna cum laude, smart guy. He's got a sense of humor. You should check out his Instagram, Attorney Rubenstein. It's just somebody that you want to work with. And again, as he goes through what is often a very complicated, difficult process. So check him out, ericrubenstein.com, 877-829 ERIC. Also check out on our Instagram, 5 Reasons Sports Instagram, the court clip of the night, which Eric sponsors there. All right, here's a possibility that hasn't been discussed a lot. We've put this in this framework of Jimmy at the end of the season, I'm going to read actually a tweet from Brian Goins, who I know you know very well. You worked with him at Miami Heat Beat. He's still with them, and he put this up way back in June. Okay, when all of this was going on between Pat and Jimmy, and some of the conversations that were had about whether or not Jimmy was going to get extended. Something the Heat will need to navigate during the Jimmy Butler extension negotiations. He could get more years if he opts out of his 25-26 player option instead of agreeing to an extension by June 30th, 2025, which essentially is just adding on 1 year of new money. We've discussed, and I'm going to give it an aside here. We've discussed what that is. It's essentially ripping up the 1 year contract, right? Okay, that Jimmy has left, and Jimmy wants that he would essentially get another $3 million for next season, but then he'd get what $58 million on top of it for 1 more year. So when we've talked about an extension for Jimmy, we've talked about it in terms of really adding 1 more year to his contract, a little bit more money the first year, and then he gets the big payoff in the last year of it. So that would essentially be playing 2 more years for the Heat. Let me continue here with Brian. Because Miami has his full bird rights, they could re-sign Butler up to a 4-year contract in his age 36 season. He'll turn 36 by the start of the new 2025 season on October 1st, 2025, without triggering, this is important, without triggering the over 38 rule, adding another 3 years of new money. The over 38 rule is a restriction on what somebody can be paid after 38, but essentially because the Heat would have his bird rights, they would be exempt from it. He could essentially then get a max deal of 4 years, $243 million. Now, we know the Heat are not doing that, okay? So let me just start with that. The last part of this tweet, an outside team could offer Butler up to a 3-year contract without having his full bird rights as a free agent, which would add another 2 years of new money and take him through his age 39 season, a max deal of 3 years, $171 million. Okay, so basically beneficial to sign with the Heat. That's the point there. I can tell you this, okay? As of right now, my information is the same as it's been. The Heat not only want to keep Jimmy Butler around this season, and this was before his explosion, his terrific performance in Detroit. Not only would they prefer to keep him around this season because they're not really afraid of losing him for nothing in the offseason because they've seen the landscape that we've talked about, which is that there aren't that many teams that are going to be looking to bring him into cap space. There aren't that many teams with cap space. There aren't many teams that are in the position to bring in a player like Jimmy Butler into that cap space and expend that cap space on him. It's an educated bet by them, okay, that those teams are not going to emerge between now and then, where a lot of these teams are going to clear enough space to be able to get Jimmy. And so they believe that even if Jimmy opts out, they'll deal with it then. Okay, take him until the end of the season. They'll deal with it then. There's not going to be any offer on the table right now that's that good. Bradley Beal certainly does not qualify. Golden State's offer has all these potential offer would have all these complications with re-signing Kuminga potentially, or taking Wiggins' contract, which is kind of, we talked about sort of a neutral contract, but do you really want it on the books for a couple more years after this? So they view it as there's really not going to be anything that emerges right now. That's why I've said they would only trade him if they're blown away by an offer, and they're not expecting to be. Okay, they're not expecting to be. Otherwise, they're fine taking him into the offseason and then dealing with the possibility of him opting out, that there won't be that many teams that can take him into cap space. And at the very least, he'll need to come back to them to do some kind of a sign and trade or an opt-in and trade. He'll need to work with them, okay? And that the Heat will be able to recoup something in that. Probably not what maybe they could recoup at the deadline, but they'll be able to recoup something, okay? Maybe they'll replenish their second-round pick stash. Who knows? But the other option is, and I know that the Heat are open to this, okay? The other option is that they give him essentially more years at the end of this thing, okay? So let's say, and I'm just spitballing here. Jimmy would essentially get an extra $3 million if he opts in, right? And then so it's basically $111 million. It's a 2-year, $111 million extension. What if the Heat gave him $111 million over 3? What if they gave him $111 million so that the money is spread out over the 3 years? So it's there are different ways to structure the contract too, so it's less punitive in a certain year that you don't want it to be punitive. Let's say that they gave him $111 million over 3. They own his burn rights, and so you're averaging roughly $37 million. Essentially, that last year of the contract is a Jimmy going away present.
If I'm Bernie Lee, like I'm pretty sure Bernie Lee, that's a quick no from him.
Okay.
That's a quick no compared to like the figures you're seeing in Brian's tweet. for example. And of course, shout
Mhm.
out Brian Goins for all the great work, cap stuff he's been doing for years now. He's the best. Shout out to him. But yeah, like when you look at those figures, like that is a huge, what you're talking about is a big discount. I feel like LeBron feels just like what the Heat would want for sure than something that I think Jimmy and Bernie Lee would settle for. And I'm not saying, I'm not trying to single out Bernie Lee. I'm just saying like,
No,
whatever
I know.
I think something they
A
would
representative of the player is what you're saying.
exactly, yeah. Yeah, I think they would
Right.
probably try to go for more than that. I was thinking around, just the figure I had in my head is like maybe like if they came to like a middle ground, it was like 150.
Okay. Well, that's significant. That's probably higher than they would want to go, would be my thought. But it
Are we
does still
negotiating right
take
now?
you. No, well, we've done this before. It still takes them beyond 2026, right? So if 2026 is a marker, but there could be a situation here where, okay, let's say 3 for 130. Let's say 3 for 1. The question is, what is Jimmy going to get in that third year somewhere, right? Like, let's say that he opts out. And we already know that teams can only sign him to 3. They can't sign him to 4. I don't think the Heat would go to 4. I
Maybe they do a
don't.
descending
Okay.
contract. You
I mean,
front
is
loaded a
that
bit, and instead of it, like they're being raised every year, there's declines every year. It's like an inverse
well?
of the
That's
way
been
that.
done. I mean, look at the Brunson contract in New York. That's a good example of that, right? That was right. That was the way that
That would
contract
be,
was structured. Was a descending contract.
but low key, I don't think that's a good move for Jimmy, because like I was looking at the like the figures that Brian had there. Even though he's
Mhm.
making around like 4 or 5 million in raises every year in that contract that he pointed out, if you look at the percentage of the cap, right, that goes down even with the raises
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
of the obviously the cap going up and stuff every year. So I think it's better for Jimmy to negotiate, just a regular contract just for his end. Like I think it would be a favor to the Heat, but maybe, that's maybe the best way for him to get paid the way he wants to. It might be the only way, because like I
That's
mentioned, like,
okay. No. That's. I'm glad you said that. I'm not going to hold
yeah,
you to that because it may be the only way.
yeah,
That's the
exactly.
thing. Because that depends on market, right? And I
Mhm.
think that as we're looking at the market, like, okay, if you're just looking at Jimmy's performance against Detroit, you're like, okay, he's worth this, but he's not that all the time. We know that, right? He's not that all the time. He's capable. Jeff Teague said on a podcast that Jimmy can do that whenever he wants. I don't think that's the case. Okay. I
I
think
know.
he can do it selectively. He's got to be
Yeah.
in the right mindset and he's got to have the right rest. All these games that he's blown up this year have been after significant rest. Okay. So any team that's bringing him in is bringing him in for the capability that he can do this some of the time when the circumstances are right. Okay. I'm not saying he's not a valuable player. Clearly he is. He raises their ceiling. We've said this many times. He would raise another team's ceiling. But it's the consistency of performance that I think is going to get some teams to back off on this. So then again, when you're talking about money, you're talking about all that, then the market starts to shrink. And then what you said was it might be the best option for him. I'm just saying this is a playing field that may make more sense for the two sides to operate in, where it's okay, we're going to do this. We're going to give you 3 years. Now let's haggle over the dollar amount. Okay. Now let's haggle over the dollar amount. Like, and maybe that last year is again the Jimmy going away present where he's expected to play 30 games at the very most, and he's not leaned on very much, and you've brought in better players around him. I just know this is a place the Heat would. This is an arena the Heat would operate in. I know that. Okay. And I know that the position of Jimmy's camp is, we can walk for nothing, and they've said that's been said to Pat and others, and I also know that Pat's attitude on that is a little bit like, okay, and then I've got $50 million plus to play with. Okay, now and again the Heat are limited in that too. They can't really play with it like just replace him with another player of his caliber. We know because of all the other factors that are involved here with the cap. But I'm just throwing this out there now because I think we've been operating in this space where it's like he either gets an extension, this exact extension, this 2 years, he wants every dollar, right? I've said that, okay? But I do think as the landscape starts to present itself, and maybe the market is not what he thought, and maybe it becomes clearer that the Heat are going to hold him until the end of the season. They're not going to take somebody's trash offer just to get a first round pick when Pat's 85 years old. That maybe, okay, they can get into this space and discuss, okay, we want Jimmy to finish his career here. We want to, like others, again, Dwayne did, but we know what happened. And again, circumstances very different with that. But we want Jimmy to finish his career here, but he's going to have to work with us a little bit. Okay. And we're going to try to put pieces around him that he has to do less as his career progresses. We're going to keep him here for 3 years. He's going to end up making a ton of money, but like I said, we may front load it. We'll figure out a way to make this thing work. But he's not going to get 111 over 2. Okay. 135 over 3, maybe 140 over 3. Maybe you go that far. But I just think that's a place that they could operate. Let me ask you this before we close. And we appreciate our sponsors, Eric Rubenstein, and also all of our sponsors, Prize Picks, Underdog, all of them. If you're the Heat, you said if you're Bernie Lee or you're his camp, you wouldn't do it. If you're the Heat, is this a place that you would look to go, or do you just are you okay just moving on from Jimmy after this season?
It's, again, I'm going to say it here, tough question, but I do think if you're at the point, right, like we're at this point where they're not in a hurry to move on from him, that means you want to keep him. And you've already said that here. It's like you, to a certain degree, you want to keep him. Maybe you're not going to go, maybe you're not going to offer him 100% of what he wants, but you're willing to keep him. So if that's the case, keep him. That's just kind of where I'm at with it. Like, that doesn't mean you offer 100%, but I think you try to maybe you do like a 2-year deal where you kind of you pump up those 2 years a little bit more than you'd be willing to do if it was a 3 or 4-year deal. You know what I mean? Like one of those types of deals. I don't know. I think you try to work it out, because it doesn't seem like Jimmy is one who wants to play like 5 more years either. So I understand why
he didn't want to play till 40. He said he didn't want to play till 40.
Exactly.
Well, okay. Final question. You can say it's a tough question, then we'll close.
Uh-huh.
So let's say he got the 2 years for 111. Let's say they rip up the contract, they rip up the option, they gave him the extension that he wanted. When those 2 years were done, how much do you think he would get in the next year? At age, what is he going to be? I'm just saying, if he was on the open market, let's say he plays out the Heat, give him an extension, then they don't extend him after the 2 years. He's a free agent. He's out there at age 30, 37. How much do you think that he would get it? I know the TV contract changes this and the numbers, but is he going to be more than a $30 million player at that point at age 37?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking he's going to be around there if he, can play a reasonable amount of games, and it isn't a situation where like nobody's willing to give him money because he's playing too little games. If he keeps, if it's like a Kawhi situation, or something extreme like that, I think he could. But yeah, like that's, it also depends on what happens these next couple of years. Like if he were to get traded to the Suns and be a third option, like guess what? His production is going to decline severely. You know what I mean? Like imagine.
Like Beals, right?
No, yeah. I mean, obviously Jimmy can do other stuff, right? And he can defend more, if he doesn't have some of the scoring load on him. But I just think it's tough for the Heat because, I think what he's giving you a strong season, in my opinion. And at least just from like eye test stuff. And then when I was looking at some numbers, like everything kind of supports that. Like he's putting up a fantastic offensive estimated plus minus like he always does. The free throw like numbers are exactly kind of, where they've always been for the most part. He's doing the stuff that he always does. The only thing is, like, I think the defense is kind of more or less where it was last season, where like that's where I think the decline has happened a little bit. Not because he can't. I just think that's where, he doesn't make as many plays as far as getting the steals like he used to on a night-to-night basis in the regular season. I still think he's capable of that. And that's the question is how many more years do you think he can give you more or less this type of Jimmy, right? Where even if you don't think he can go back to what he was against the Bucks in that first round a couple of seasons ago, the Jimmy that he's at right now, which to me is still a very strong player. Like all the the advanced stats bear it out. Even the on-off data so far, it's still pretty early, but there's been a decent enough sample size, 25-ish games, whatever it's been. He has the best net rating so far that he's had in a Heat uniform compared to other seasons. I think they're like a plus 7 point something so far with him on the court, whereas other years it usually hangs around plus 5. So I still think he is somebody that is like an engine for them on offense, even on nights where, it feels like you're not feeling him as much. I think it's because Tyler has taken that step too. And by the way, the advanced stats bear out very positively for him too, that this is like a leap year for him. So that's the biggest difference, is that Tyler is now taking on that load as well. But Jimmy is still that guy. Like, he's still awesome. And he's shown you that his formula can win in the playoffs. So it's either you're in for this window or you're not. I just think they got to figure out how long do they want to be in for. and how much are you willing to pay him for? That's why I kind of go back to that 2-year stuff.
I get everything you're saying. He is actually shooting his highest percentage of his career, not just his Heat career. After the first quarter of this year, second quarter through overtime, he's shooting 58% this season. You mentioned the metrics, the efficiency. It's all there when he's
Highest
committed.
percentage
Like
at
that,
the rim too, for in career
right?
high, and
Which
it's not
is
with
which is
less
supposed
volume
to be
either.
which is supposed to be declining at this stage. So he's proving he's making his point. I'm just saying that if we're going to say that in 2 years, if he was given the 111 and then in over 2 years, and then he not opts out, but then he's a free agent, is he getting more than 30 million at that stage? And if he's not, is there some way to craft a 3-year, $135 million contract, something along those lines, that at least guarantees him that amount of money and he can have a wind down season and drink coffee in Miami in the last year? Just throwing it out there, okay? Because there's more than one way to handle this situation, and it just seems like the public on this is just he has to be traded. No, he doesn't. Okay, there are various ways to get this done. There's smart people on both sides, and Bernie has said repeatedly and told the Heat repeatedly that he wants Jimmy to finish. Jimmy wants to finish his career in Miami. If both sides are motivated to do this, I got to think they can get around a table and figure out a dollar amount. Okay, that's where I'm at with it. All right, thanks to Alex. Appreciate our sponsors, ericrubenstein.com. If you get a car accident, that's the guy to go to. And again, Underdog, use the code FIVE.
Thank you for listening to the Five on the Floor on the Five Reasons Sports Network. After all, someone needs to listen to my dad.